Well, the reason that I'm so keen and happy to be able to connect with you was that I had the pleasure of interviewing Lizzie Gottlieb about her film Turn Every Page quite recently, and during our conversation, she had mentioned to me that you, Andy Hughes, had been interviewed by her, but that it didn't make the film. And so, first of all, the topic was fascinating and lovely. The fact that Bob Caro was interested in the production of his books, very interested, and the love and attention and care that you have given his books. Is that what you were talking about? Maybe you could just tell us and allow me, to introduce you as the Senior Vice President and Director of Production Design for Knopf Doubleday Publishing Group. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, it was so funny because a friend of mine and I watched the film together, and I didn't know this until after the fact. He focused in on this very point too. He was very interested in knowing what you had to say.
Yeah, well, I've been here at Knopf 43 years, and one of the reasons I was attracted to this particular publisher was because of its legacy of quality books, and in all aspects, not only obviously in the editorial selections, that have occurred over the decades, Bob Gottlieb, and prior to that, Alfred A. Knopf, but, subsequently with Sonny Mehta, who was president and publisher for 30 years until 2019. And now, of course, we have a new president, Maya Mutabi. But throughout, all my career, the emphasis and my mentor, Ellen McNeely, who, trained me, were all aspects of fine bookmaking. And the interesting thing for me in the last, 40 years had been the significant and kind of in the context of book manufacturing, revolutionary changes that have occurred in the entire process. So clearly, in the beginning, when I started, everything was done linotype. So it was hot metal composition, and all that implies, all the craftsmanship, all the attention to the detail. We would produce long galleys at the initial typesetting phase. Of course, authors submitted typewritten on a typewriter manuscripts, and then they would be retyped for the linotype process. And then we would go into locked pages as a second step, and then finally into what was called at the time repro. And that was a kind of a photographic paper in which, after all the proofreading had been done at every single of those prior stages, the repro would be sent to the offset printer to be photographed, literally, on a giant camera. And then that negative would be used to image onto an offset printing plate the film derived from that repro, which is the final text of the book, and then imposed, often by hand, on what was called the goldenrod. And at that time, certainly when the Power Broker first came out, it was all sheet fed printing. So, it was one side of the sheet at a time. And after each side was printed, then the sheet went to a folder and was folded into signatures. And then after the signatures were folded, they were fed into a gathering machine that then assembled them sequentially, signature one through however many signatures are in the book. In the Power Broker was over 40 signatures. Then the book, of course, at that time, in those days, in the mid-70s still, all the signatures were then sewn together. So we had the Smythe sewing binding process and then cased in. And again, in those days, all the books had cloth cases, cloth-bound books. All those days are now over. So we don't now do books in that same manner. So all the subsequent books,
except for Caro's books, right?
well, to an extent, in
Yes.
fact, the Power Broker, has been
Yes.
around now for since '75. So that's hitting 50 years, and the last two printings, because of price considerations, quality considerations, I moved the reprints, the last two reprints, to offshore, where we could get the full cloth case, the Smythe sewn signatures, the beautiful half round spine, European half round.
What does that exactly mean, Andy?
So, are you familiar with our Everyman's Library?
I am, yes.
All right. Well, I also
Sonny was involved in that, wasn't he? In
yes,
sort
we
of
relaunched
that?
this in the early '90s, and we have
Yes.
about 700 titles in the backlist. Can you see this?
Yes, I can.
All right. So you see this spine.
Yes,
Well,
there's a nice curve to it.
If you go to a bookstore and look at them, you'll see that the formation of the spine has a bit of a dome, a half round, and it also encourages the lay flatness of the book,
Yes.
which I think is extraordinarily important for the readability, for the user friendliness of the experience of reading a printed book. With adhesive binding, which is now the commonplace mode in which all books in America are manufactured, it doesn't have that kind of characteristic. This is actually happening in most publishers globally, where the manufacturing is done in a web press, and then the adhesive binding causes what I refer to as mousetrapping. It makes the book very tight and very difficult to open and lay flat. In any case, it was very good opportunity in the umpteenth printing of The Power Broker, which is a 1296-page book, plus 24 pages of inserts, to restore that, especially in commemoration or in acknowledgement of Lizzie's great movie, those kind of artifact achievements of fine bookmaking. And so if you see a current edition of the hardcover in the marketplace, you'll see that compared to earlier previous editions over the last several decades, it's a very fine piece of bookmaking. So that's a kind of situation that, feel great pleasure, in having maintained or restored or revitalized, some aspect of the importance of that particular book.
Now, were you able to keep what's the price? Were you able to keep the price?
No, of course not. No, the prices, of all books, are going up, and especially when a book has been in print really 50 years, because of the cost of materials, labor, etc. The retail price has gone up. It's a supply-demand situation. Now, the paperback, on the other hand, I have a copy of that right here, still printed domestically. It's the same book with some modifications for its paperback format, but that I think is now retailing for about $25. I'd have to double check that, but it's obviously a choice that the book reader makes, to have the hardcover or the paperback.
How much does the hardback go for now? The beautiful.
I would have to go back and look in our system. So,
sure.
Being that we're on the internet right now, I can't do that quite quickly.
Understood. Okay.
But I can get back to you on that. But
what you're telling me, though, is you're telling me that it's worth it, though, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. If you want,
yes.
The bona fides of a fine, well-made book, and a book as important as The Power Broker.
Yes.
The price.
Wonderful.
The other thing that's important to know about, working with Bob, because of his deep appreciation of the printed book, very concerted effort he'll make into the presentation of the page layout, the whole organization of the book, in through all stages of composition and then manufacturing and printing. He, has, of course, over the span of all these decades, with his Lyndon Johnson volumes, we're obviously up to volume 4, waiting for volume 5 whenever, he's finished. And of course, if you saw the movie, you understand his whole process, prior to it ever coming into the publisher's office. But the technology of book composition has changed through several epochs, that started from, as I said, linotype, went into computer mainframe. We made that transition, I think, on the second Johnson book, Passage to Power, and then subsequently desktop. So the latter two volumes, Master of the Senate, and before that, I guess it was Passage to Power. There was the Path to Power, and then Passage to Power, and then Master of the Senate. Went from all these transitional technologies for book composition, each of them bringing new challenges, not only in the utilization of fonts and the way fonts are rendered, in each of these technologies, but, just the integrity of the established format of his books through each successive technology to make sure that we were maintaining the look we achieved in the original linotype. I mean, you could say linotype was, very, very, very beautiful due to the craftsmanship of the linotype operators and their skills going back many, 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 many decades. The whole nature of that process, produced a very, very beautiful type page. So, to replicate that in subsequent composition technologies was quite a challenge. And, Bob was very alert to it. Also, once we finally gotten into desktop publishing in the early 90s, there have been, many application software program changes. We started with Quark, and then it ultimately moved into InDesign, which is an Adobe Creative Suite product and a page layout program. And although, we've made some huge changes in the manner of our proofreading processes, most of it prompted by the condition of remote work during the COVID periods. We adopted here at Penguin Random, and certainly at Knopf, a different manner in which, we were kind of paper free. In other words, in the old days, of course, I described to you the long galleys we would get for hot metal composition. And those are all then inked, metal, and then run on a piece of paper over them to capture the type. Subsequently, of course, it's all laser printers or other kinds of delivery printer systems over these decades. But, with the remote workflow, we wanted to liberate ourselves from paper. We used to create in mainframe computer composition days these pages, which we now call first pass, second pass, third pass, different proofreading stages. And they would accumulate quite voluminously, lots and lots of paper. So the remote workflow forced us, basically to examine an alternative method. And so what we use is the PDF markup workflow. So we set in the application file InDesign, and then we distill that application file to a PDF, and the PDF simulates, it's virtually a photographic rendition of the typeset page out of InDesign, so that can be then transferred to the proofreaders. Oftentimes for these complex books, there's multiple proofreaders looking against the master set, obviously the manuscript, and then blind proofreading to check, all sorts of other issues in the proofreading process. And they mark it up utilizing this ability in Adobe PDF to make comments and to mark changes electronically. So we have a completely electronic workflow. But what we work very hard to do, that in that context, we still maintain what was the standard, the aesthetic standard from the linotype days. You look confused.
Well, what I'm thinking is with the linotype and the sort of the physical proof, the galley, the proof, the material that the proofreaders received. I guess, is it a question of quality? Like, I'm thinking hey, this is really well done, so maybe they're reading it better somehow. Maybe this is just a person speaking personally. I feel all kind of cloudy when I'm reading something on the screen. I just want it as a physical piece of paper that I can put my hand on and write my annotations and marginalia, and it just feels more solid. Now that's just an older man maybe talking about my experience with words and reading and paper. Do you think the quality of the actual exercise is as good as it was in the past?
I do. I do. I
Yes.
mean, I think, it was definitely a learning curve and an acclimation on the part of our brilliant production editors and proofreaders and designers, to familiarize themselves with this electronic workflow. But, in an age in which we had to be concerned about, excess paper consumption and the fact that we make books on paper, where it can be eliminated, where it can provide other assets to the scrutiny that can be applied in the proofreading process to the
Yes.
content.
Yes. Yeah.
But it is a learned skill set, and we applaud the efforts and the achievements of our production editors and proofreaders to be
Yes.
able to do what maybe yourself or myself or others would find onerous.
Yes.
Obviously, we're in an age in which we have big monitors and we have other software programs that are there to assist us in that process. But, it took because the discussion that ensued for at least 10 years when we adopted a more electronic digital workflow, that
Yeah.
the COVID epidemic precipitated a jump in the lake to make it work, to make it happen, because we were all separated. There was
Yeah.
no opportunity to hand off, laser printed galleys from one person to the next. We were scattered. So I don't know if it would have happened if that remote workflow for 2+ years never occurred.
Yeah, I guess I'm focusing in on craftsmanship. The craftsmanship of the linotype operator, that's one thing. And it took years for them to develop that. But the other thing is proofreading. So proofreading, the quality is not gonna deteriorate.
No, it is not. And
It's,
again,
it,
at our house, I can only speak for my one place of employment. We have extraordinarily production editors. The way it's organized, you have obviously the editors, who acquire the books, have the relationships with the agents and the authors. And then, in the operational areas, I'm in production and oversee production and design, dealing with manufacturers and internal departments. But then we have our close collaborators and colleagues are the production editors, who work more directly with the authors and the proofreaders, and then, of course, with the designers in-house and with production. So we work
mm,
very collaboratively. The high standards that exist here are something that everybody takes very, very seriously. I mean, there's a lot of
yes.
complaints in the world about, the degradation in the quality of editing and proofreading. And I can tell you my experiences that doesn't exist here. We try damn hard to maintain standards in spite of lurching to grasp all the advantages technology has provided us.
Well, I think Andy that Knopf is the standard. I mean, you are the standard.
Well, we try
You
to be.
right. The question sort of came up in the film about the size of a book. How big can a book be? And they were
Well,
talking,
a book could be any size. However,
right.
there are certain standards, and I can very briefly give you a cursory view of why the books are the size they are.
Yeah.
Bob's book is a 6 1/8 by 9 1/4, or it's actually 6 1/4 inches by 9 1/4 inches. Knopf has a tradition over its 100 years of having what we call the deckled edge, the rough front.
Yeah.
Some
Love
people
that.
in these days, when people buy our books on Amazon, they think it's a big mistake and they write letters of complaint. However, it is our house style. So we have these days be a little bit more circumspect about the use of the rough front or the deckled edge, the rough front pages. It basically harked back to the methodology in which books were printed when they were printed sheet fed. And, people used to have knives in which they would liberate pages, going back into the 19th century. And in the folding process, prior to, the very sophisticated slitters or cutters that exist now at vendors, because most books are, flat cut on all three sides.
Yes. Yeah.
So we have an artifice of maintaining the rough front because everything is printed pretty much on a web press to retain that rough front aesthetic. Love it or not love it. Some people do, some people don't. But in any case, 6 1/4, 9 1/4, another traditional size, common size, and I'm talking about hardcovers, is 5 1/2 by 8 1/4. Now, the origin of those two traditional sizes, and when I identify those particular sizes, think iterations thereof. It could be 6 by 9, it could be 5 by 8, something like that. But it derived basically from early paper making processes. So they're machines that would output certain size paper because of the dimensions of the paper making machine. So two standard sizes there are others, but two standard sizes, especially for cream offset paper that was used for these kind of books, were 50 by 76 inches, and another one 45 by 68. When you fold a 50 and 76 sheet, you will get 32-page signatures at 6 1/4 by 9 1/4. When you fold the 45 by 68, you'll get 32-page signatures at 5 1/2 by 8 1/4, or 5 5/8 by 8 1/4 with a rough front. So it's kind of a horse before the cart kind of thing. And so subsequently, when web press technology assumed preeminence in the 1970s, presses were configured to produce, using rolls rather than sheets, books that had signatures that were at those two dimensions, 6 by 9 and 5 by 8. And, you know that all books come in increments of 32-page signatures. That's a standard. Or half a signature, 16 pages. Bob's Power Broker is actually a 40 32-page signatures and one 16-page signature. So it's 40 1/2 signatures. So it's divisible by 32 or 16. So, basically the origin of those two sim sizes is predicated on an earlier paper making technology that is sustained throughout all these decades. Books can be any size, and they are. I do a lot of graphic novels for Pantheon, and graphic novelists, have very particular, needs for the presentation of their material. We do more diminutive books. Paperbacks, for instance, we publish vintage and anchor paperbacks. Their trim size is 5 3/16 by 8. And again, that's a standard. They're all pretty much that size. The other thing, the technology has allowed us to do is, prior to scanners and other kind of technical abilities, we would literally shoot down a hardcover page by a camera shot that would reduce it to a percentage, say 92% of the original hardcover page. Now we do this all electronically. But the point is that we're repurposing the hardcover file for the paperback edition. But the other thing that we've achieved here at Knopf and Penguin Random House is the integration of all the delivery systems of the content into the marketplace, be it a print hardcover book or a paperback or an ebook. So when we prepare our files using the markup language that's necessary for composition, we are preparing files that are going to be suitable for being transitioned with another software program at the conclusion of the entire proofreading process of the book to be converted to an OEB, an ebook file suitable for ebook presentation, which has its own prerequisites. It'll be interesting to note that, Bob has chosen not to have his books issued as ebooks.
I love that.
So not. and not that he's against ebooks, but he's more, I think, pertinently concerned with the integrity of the presentation that has been achieved in the
Very
book.
good. Yes. Okay.
So, also the reader in an ebook environment has the leverage to increase the type, reduce the type. It blows up, the presentation of the content that has been very well considered.
Is he resisting technology, or is he saying, listen, if you want to read me, you read me in the way that I want to present my writing?
Well, you can look at it that way, and that's true. But at the same time, Bob is completely, cognizant of the technology that we're utilizing to compose his books. We still get from him. Well, we haven't got a file from Bob in a couple of years now, so we'll see what's up next. But as you know, we started.
When are you going to get that file? Do you know something?
Yeah,
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
We don't talk about that.
Yes, I know.
But what typically we get now is a Word file. We ask our authors to present to us a Word file to identify its components, its headers, its chapter openers, all the elements of that book as something the designer can assign an attribute to.
Well, sorry, Andy, I was just going to say that kind of fits in with right at the very beginning. You need to look at things like chapter headings and all of the other things that are going into a book to figure out, first of all, how long it is so you can figure out the unit cost, right?
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, again, when we start out on a project, the manuscript, be it, say, a Word file, or if it's not presented to us as a Word file, we may need to rekey it to create a Word file and then mark up that Word file. The designer will then, we start with a planning manuscript. The designer will come up with a design, that's been approved by the editor, the author, and whoever else has a say in it, and predicated certainly on certain attributes that we want a book that's 6 1/4 by 9 1/4. These are going to be the elements of that book. And with their design created with the InDesign application, they'll create a cast off flowing in the Word file into the design will determine what the page count will be. So, all that's happening very upfront. Once we have that cast off, then, my department, which, responsible for scheduling and with composition processes and manufacturing, will also do an estimate.
Yes.
And again, that's a whole other, very refined process to create P&Ls, et cetera, to determine the retail price of the book and make other kind of publishing decisions that, will either enhance the attributes of the book or minimize them to make it an affordable enterprise. So We'll get that cast off, and with that page count and with that trim size, we'll then prepare estimates going to the vendors, the book manufacturers that still exist, and come up with what's called the unit cost, the PPB, paper, printing, binding, and a plant cost. And a plant cost are the one-time costs incurred for typesetting, the preparation of inserts or the jacket, and other kind of, or translation if there is a translation. So all the one-time costs that you're not going to spend again and again when you reprint. We supply a plant at a PPB, and then based on that information, our finance department is going to run P&Ls. And so, all that's happening in the background for every single title. And of course, as you know, we publish as lists. So we have a spring, a summer, and a fall list. So they're combined as, it's the spring list, the fall list, et cetera. And each of these lists has books that are deemed appropriate to be included on that particular list. So usually our bigger, more complex books, illustrated books, would be published on the fall list. And again, it's the perception of the marketplace and when people are going to bookstores and when they're going to buy these books. And of course, obviously, Christmas time is the holiday season is a very important time, for the sale of a lot of our more major titles.
How do you determine who gets a cloth binding and who doesn't?
Well, no one does anymore, really. We made that transition back in the 90s.
Okay.
It was a cost factor. And other degradations in the manufacturing process, the ability, to adequately foil stamp cloth covers. So we made a transition back then, again, as a major cost-saving effort, but also facing reality where we had what we called a three-piece case. And so it had cloth in the spine and colored paper on the sides. We've ultimately transitioned to pretty much full paper case side.
I hate that.
They can look quite beautiful. Sophistication, the paper making process of those materials that we use.
Yes.
They have textures and other attributes. I'm used to it. They're perfectly
Yes.
This is not to say that there are books that will do abroad.
Don't you prefer cloth bindings to cardboard?
Not anymore.
Okay.
It's not cardboard. It's board with
I know.
very refined, specialized paper on top of it. A cloth bound book we do from time to time. For instance, our Every Man's Library are fully cloth bound. But there are other reasons in which I fight to maintain the integrity of the specification. We also have a ribbon marker or a title page. But those are books in the public domain. So there's not an author.
That's true. Yeah.
The classics of global literature. And so they are books that, we will prepare just like I described it, computer typesetting, but then manufacture it with the latest technology. And again, they're all common trim sizes. I mean, we have 3 trim sizes for Every Man's Library. We have the adult classics, the stories series, and the pocket poets. And those are library worthy, for putting on somebody's shelf.
They're durable.
They're durable. They use acid-free paper, and all the other attributes for maintaining in perpetuity on one's library shelves.
Okay. Did Bob insist on a particular typeface?
Yeah, again, that's a long time ago.
And he wanted to stick with it.
He wanted to stick with it, yeah. So, every Knopf title has a colophon page, the back of the book. This particular colophon page, PowerBook was set in Times Roman, design font. Give me a minute.
Stanley Morrison, yes.
Let me check the Master of the Senate. And it was also in Times New Roman. Computer typeset version of that font. So again, yes, there was a lot of concern and discussion about, the fidelity of the computer version of this font with the original linotype font. But that's his font, yes.
You know what's interesting is that even the choice of a font might affect the number of pages in the book.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, the font, its point size and leading are clearly integral to determining what a castrobe is. The number of lines per page, the line on the page. So all those are factors that are carefully considered, and Bob is very concerned about them. So preeminently, it's readability that, is a primary concern. So it's no interference with some sort of elaborate or fanciful type. Of course, there are thousands and thousands of fonts, many beautiful fonts, but that's a very, very legible font.
Yes. Okay. So we've looked at estimates. We've looked at what about paper now? Is there a paper that he wanted to use?
Absolutely. Yeah. So again, the paper industry has changed pretty dramatically in the last 50 years. But at Knopf, against the trends in the industry at large, we still use what's called a free sheet. And that's a paper that, has been processed and prepared, lignin-free, and of the highest quality, versus groundwood paper. Many books now are published with groundwood paper, which is not as refined and, will tend to discolor after a period of time, especially exposed to sunlight. But the free sheet, is a premium sheet, and it costs such. And so it's a very difficult maneuver in the marketplace to maintain a price point when you want to use a quality paper. So going back 50 years, the mill that we used was the Warren Mill up in Maine. They subsequently have gone out of business. But, we've switched to a mill in Spring Grove, Pennsylvania. It used to be called the Glatfelter Mill. Of course, like so many other companies, including publishers, it's been subsumed into larger conglomerate investor organizations. And their paper, we used to call it Glatfelter, is now referred to as Pixel, and it's a brand name of their choosing. And, paper comes obviously for one color straight text books. I'm not talking about illustrated books, which would require a different kind of substrate, a paper that has a coating, either a gloss coated or a matte coated. But we also want the cream cast to the paper. There used to be a lot more varieties of cream tinted paper, but now it's pretty much limited to just a couple of shades. But the point being that you don't want to print the book, especially as lengthy as the Power Broker, on a stark white paper. The glare would be extraordinarily headachy. So instead, we use this cream paper. Most novels and most nonfiction books are printed on a cream cast paper for basically the ease in the eye and the pleasure of the reading experience of the contrast of the type to the paper substrate cast. So we use that color paper. Now, of course, Bob's books are very many pages. So you want to choose a paper that's going to give you an appropriate bulk for the reading experience. Now, 1296 pages for the Power Broker, clearly you want to use a thinner paper. Or, a less page count book, you would use likely a thicker paper. Paper comes in many, many characteristics. There's the weight of the paper, 45 pound, 55 pound, 60 pound and up. In Europe, of course, it would be grams. And then there's what's called the PPI, pages per inch. And again, that's the calendaring of the paper. So at each of those weights, 45 to 55 and above, you can calendar the paper to be thinner, but its inherent pulp content would be higher, the higher the poundage is. So,
yes, does that mean that it's more condensed?
Yeah, more condensed in the paper making process.
Yes.
And that would contribute to also enhancing the opacity of the paper. One of the things that, I find extremely important is to get decent opacity so that there's not bleed through in the page.
Right. You don't want one of these sort of Bible type rice paper almost, right?
Exactly.
That's one end.
As an example. But that's usually like a 25 pound paper anyway, which we wouldn't be using. It's not appropriate for what we do. But so you want to get paper that has good opacity. I mean, American papers tend to have much better opacity than European papers. I don't know why, but that's the case. So, although the page of a book is quite dense, it's blocks of type. Type is backed up page, the front page to the verso page of it. You want to make sure that, you're not, obviously not lined up. So there's that see-through in the leading and the lines, the space between the lines. But nevertheless, if you have a chapter opening, you don't want to bleed through, or if you have an illustrated page, you don't want to have that bleed through as well. Paper quality is extraordinarily important.
So you deal just with one company in Pennsylvania, or do you spread it around?
No, there are. Well, again, there's been a diminishing in the number of available mills that make paper for books. Again, over the COVID period and even before, there have been pretty significant changes in the paper industry because paper for books is quite a small part of their business.
Isn't that a concern about all the pulp going towards boxes that Amazon is putting their stuff in?
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. There's much more lucrative business, in packaging and corrugation. So, there have been a fall of a lot of mills. Now, in our industry and probably for other industries that require paper products, there are merchants who represent mills. So we deal with many, many different merchants who represent many different mills, the number decreasing though it may be. We source paper globally, from Scandinavia, but the American paper market, or making is quite significant, nevertheless.
What about Canadian? Do you
Canadian, North American? I include them in because
okay.
it's a North American effort.
Yes, market, right?
We also had to be very concerned about the environment, so we
Yes.
try to use FSC papers, which is to guarantee that no old growth forests have been chopped down, for the paper sourcing, the pulp, that it's managed forest, sources for the paper that we use. And at Penguin Random House, we have an extraordinary paper inventory department that manages the acquisition of the paper, the delivery of the paper, all the needs that we have, because we're publishing many thousands of books a year at Penguin Random House. So
Yes.
it's extraordinary, and it is global.
Andy, so are there reps that come in that sort of represent a bunch of different companies? Is that how it works? And they sort of show their stuff?
Yeah, well, no one comes in anymore. When I started, I had salesmen coming in from every aspect of the business, selling their wares.
Yes, wonderful.
Those days are over. So, it much more electronic relationships, established contract relationships, bidding relationships. So vendors are vetted or those merchants. And so we have, a process of which, we agree to use that particular merchant and their mills or not. Obviously, a lot of it has to be based on pricing. Pricing has gone up hugely in the last couple of years. We heard about supply side. So, the cost of paper has gone up astronomically.
Yeah, and of course, everyone expects a book to be no more than $35. That you have to be careful with that too, haven't you?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a price point that people are willing to pay. Because why should they be? But the average reader is simply not going to be cognizant of all the effort, all the costs that have gone in, let alone the acquisition and the royalty and the fact that books are, if they don't sell, they can come back to us as a return. So,
yes.
Our adoption of all these technologies and, our presence in New York City, all these factors are very significant escalating costs that, we have to mitigate by being as careful and lean and adopting technologies that drive out costs that we used to pay in the past.
Well, I suppose it's just squeezing your profit margin is what it's doing.
That's right.
And shareholders demand a certain return.
That's right. Well, we don't have shareholders at our company, but we do have a corporate owner, who does watch the bottom line very carefully.
Right. We're talking about Bertelsmann.
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean, I started, when the company was owned by RCA. I don't even know if they even have a ghost of a existence at this point. But then subsequently, we were bought by Condé Nast. And then in the late 90s, we were acquired by Bertelsmann.
I'm reading a biography. Did you read the biography of Condé Nast? I don't know, it came out about 5 or 10 years ago.
No, I hadn't, no.
It's got a great cover. It's kind of a shiny gold color, Art Deco.
Yeah, no, when I started the compulsory reading or the handout, by Donald Klopper, who ran the company at the time, was At Random by Bennett Cerf.
Yes, that came in a slipcase, yeah. What about the number of books that you do sort of limited editions for? Do you do any of that?
No, not so much these days. Again, when I started, we published Gabriel Garcia Marquez and John Updike, and every single one of their titles had a limited slipcase edition.
Yeah.
And over the years, there have been a few that was done for, but these days, what is more commonplace is a signed edition. The retailers, be it Amazon or Barnes & Noble or independent stores, will sell people who want a signed edition. But, at least in commercial publishing, of which, I'm a part, the high-end limited deluxe edition is a thing of the past. The only author we currently do it for is John Grisham. each of his books, we come out with a very limited slipcase box set signed edition.
Okay. What about the bindings then? Do you have again? It's all what by going on tender, but who do you use to do your binding?
Well, all the vendors that we use in North America are integrated printers and binders. They have, their pre-press department to prepare the files for imaging to plate. Of course, we now make plates using CTP, computer to plate. So they take our files and image directly to the plate, and the plate is mounted on the web press. And then, those same facilities will have binding lines in the same location. So it's integrated manufacturing process. Again, in the old days, when I started, there were a lot of separate binders and printers. We would ship sheets, to a bindery for them to bind up, but that's not practical any longer.
Now, how about, it's funny about dust jackets. When you think about it, with the technology we've got now, we don't really need dust jackets, do we?
No, and when the internet and online retailing came in, one of the obviously good points that was made is that a book is rendered as a little thumbnail on the internet. There was a very, especially here at Knopf, with the group of designers that we had, you may be familiar with the name Chip Kidd, for instance. There was a very much a renaissance of jacket design. And our component vendors, the people who make covers and jackets, are completely separate manufacturers. They're very specialized because we have different laminates that are put on the jackets and covers, and then there's all sorts of special effects, foil stamping, embossing, die cutting, you name it. And, again, over the COVID period, because of obviously the condition of the workers at a lot of these plants, there were a lot of call outs, sick, etc. We really diminished the number of special effects that we put on, and it's now become kind of the way of the world. So you'll see as of late a lot less special effects except for big commercial type titles. But the trend now, we do a lot of cookbooks. We were the house that published Julia Childs.
Yes. Yes.
But we have now adopted a very much broader and larger cookbook strategy, very beautiful high-end cookbooks. And the trend now is to eliminate the jacket.
Yeah, well, I mean, especially if you're in the kitchen,
Yeah, and we have just what, we call pre-printed cases. And they'll look like a jacket, except they won't be a jacket. It'll be printed directly on the hardcover book.
Right. What about print on demand?
Well, again, that's gone through many evolutions.
Yeah.
In the very beginning, there was what was called print on demand, and that was literally print one copy as needed from files that were available. But that has evolved, and it's the whole issue of digital printing. Digital printing is perfectly acceptable in appearance, but it's mostly now done for the long tail of publishing. So we have a very large digital print operation for our vintage and anchor titles and other comparable publishing of paperbacks, so that when to keep that book in print, when you no longer need the minimum quantity you need for printing offset, which is 1,000 copies, we could print a couple of hundred. And so digital print is in its adolescence. It continues to improve. You can't really easily do in a digital print environment a hardcover, because they don't have the binding equipment at these facilities to do those add-ons, to make a hardcover edition, but certainly for paperbacks. So, the digital print is with us, and it's a very, very important part of our business.
Do you own that? Does the company own that production? No.
It's either there are independents, manufacturers that have digital printing units, and most printer companies that have integrated printing and binding also have digital equipment.
I see.
So that when it comes to that threshold moment in which you want to transition to a digital version, digitally printed version, they're able to do so.
Okay. I am winding down now, just so that you're aware. Prior to our discussion, I read a chapter from What Happens in in Book Publishing.
I don't know that book. When was it
Yeah.
written?
Well,
Looks like,
it was published in 1967.
I was going to say early 70s.
Yes.
Things have changed since then, as I've
They
described.
yes, they have. Yes. This is edited by Chandler B. Granis, but the chapter on book production and manufacturing is by Frank Myrick, who I'll just let you know, who was the director of research and development for the Spender Bindery. And I would just want to read this out and get your take, if I could.
Sure.
Because so many talents, so many materials, so many processes are used in the production of the simplest book, it is essential that control be exerted from start to finish. Beginning with the production jacket, no detail should be left to guesswork, and the source and responsibility for each component must be spelled out. Colors must be cited. Complete details must be given on the composition, the paper, number of pages in each form, imposition, trim size, bulk, source and printer of illustrations, end sheets, cover, type of plates, total edition, number of copies to be completed, final trim size as well as untrimmed size if untrimmed, what edges are to be left rough. if to be stained or gilt used. I've got my cat that's getting in the way of my light here. Sorry, and I don't want to smack her, do I? Okay, just to finish off here. Reinforcements, tight, hollow, round, or square backs, whether the book is to be perfect bound, sewn, or wired, linings for the backbone, headbands, or not. Each step is related to its predecessor, and all have a sharp bearing on cost. Fractions of a cent per copy multiply quickly. Production staffs should be constantly searching for new and better methods and reevaluating the older ones. In particular, they should make it a habit to study and visit suppliers so as to familiarize themselves with their operations. To do so pays dividends in lowered costs, improved quality, and more saleable products. That's the way he ends this. And
Well,
it's
I completely agree 100%. As I think I've told you before, a production person's job is mired in minutia. It's detail after detail after detail. I, because I've been around for a long time, have had the benefit of the opportunity to go to vendors on a regular basis. So I've been to many vendors all over the world.
Yeah.
These days, that just simply is not available to younger people on staff. We try to find those opportunities, but, with the internet, the need to go on press. I went on many press approvals over the decades, and you're basically signing off on how the printer is printing that particular sheet, mostly for 4-color books. But, with all the assets available to us, the kind of contract proof quality digital proofs, soft proofing, the preparation of the files within an inch of their life for exactitude of reproduction to your intention, it's not necessary to go and meet your printer colleagues, but the communication with them still has to be exacting. So everything
Yes.
you read to me is very pertinent. It's just that it's done in a different way.
Jerry Kelly, the great book designer, has told me that he thinks the standard of the actual sort of printing is really good.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
I said to a colleague the other day that I wished I could revisit, titles that I worked on in the 70s and the 80s, utilizing today's technology, because, the things you were just, so frustrated by and limited to do now are just, it's miraculous. And, the unfortunate aspect of this is that, the craftsmanship and the manufacturing environment is not commensurate to that capability oftentimes. So
what does that mean?
What that means is that you don't get the quality product that, in the physical making that the preparation of the file for printing would allow. Printing could be done very well or it could be done mediocrely. It depends on the attitude and the conditions of the company you're engaged with. And there's just been a decrease in that level of craftsmanship.
There's been an increase in mechanization, and maybe there's less of a human touch. There's less charm. Is that what you're getting at?
No, it's not a charm issue. It's there still is quite a bit of human touch, but it's not human touch in the manner in which there's the same care or appreciation of the activity in which those people may be engaged. It's a kind of a churn it out, sausage factory kind of environment sometimes that we have to contend with. So, yeah.
That's very much a William Morris quote right there from you.
Well, current manufacturing capabilities are not as good as the old days. I put it that way. Because of that element of pride of craft, pride of product. And while we can, prepare a beautiful file and we can print a beautiful sheet, I think lacking oftentimes is, the aggregation of all the pieces into an artifact of great beauty. We achieve it from time to time. I have vendors that I love and that do a great job. Just did the Cormac McCarthy box set at a vendor that I think did a magnificent job. It was a struggle because it was a little bit bigger a project than, maybe they were capable of handling, but they pulled through. But they created a book, with all the assets and craftsmanship that are very, very important and appealing to me. And I think, ultimately the box set, it came out just splendidly. So when you have those successes, it's very, very, very gratifying. But then on the other hand, there are a number of titles that, in spite of all one's, efforts, just come up short because of that missing element of craft.
Still, I want to just drill before we leave. I just want to drill down on that a little bit. You're saying that, we're saying that printing is better than it's ever been, or it's very good, but
potentially,
it's not,
yes.
But it's not good. So what's?
No. I'm not saying it's not good. Printing can be fantastic, like never before, and any of the vendors that I use achieve that level of excellence. Okay.
Yes.
There are other printers that we have to use, and because of circumstances, because of their MO, will not do as good a job. Okay.
Yes.
So not to put them down, or that's just the way of the world, and you just try to hope to have the opportunity to give to those vendors who do magnificent work every job you possibly can, but that's not practical. But where there is a slippage, in the quality is predominantly the binding. When the transition was made to adhesive binding, I think it was a real terrible loss. The readability of a book, the pleasure of the engagement with the book, where it lays flat, it's not mousetrapping, it's not too tight, not falling into the gutter. Just if all I can say is look at an Everyman's title and compare it to the mill title you see at a bookstore. And if you can't perceive a difference, then good for you. If you do, you'll see what I'm talking about. And I'm very happy to have the relationship I have with the manufacturer of the Everyman series. I've kept it at one plant in Germany, and they do a magnificent job. It's costly, but I think it's something that we work to make happen, by raising the retail price, which we have to be not an expensive product, but it's become more expensive to maintain those standards of craftsmanship and quality.
Who is that? What is that company? I want to go visit them and interview someone there.
Okay. Well, point of fact, they're a sister company of Penguin Random House. They're owned by Bertelsmann. It's called GGP, and they're in Poznan, Germany. And there's another Bertelsmann facility called Mohn Media, and they're in Gütersloh, Germany. I just printed a major book of ours by Ken Burns there. But GGP is where I've kept all of the Everyman's libraries for 30 years.
Okay. And that's top of the line. That's wonderful.
Well, for that kind of book, it is, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. My favorite printer, for illustrated books is in China.
Well, who are they?
CNC Offset.
Okay.
That's another whole kind of conversation.
It is.
Of global manufacturing.
Yes.
Quality, price, and service.
Very good. Okay. Favorite book you've ever worked on, and then we'll close her down.
Oh my God, I don't even know where to begin. I mean, I've read thousands of titles. I know that's a stupid response, but
Sentimental favorite, then. Sentimental favorite.
I think would be the Nabokov, the original of Laura that I did. That was a real challenge. I don't know if you're familiar with the book, but
I've heard. I haven't read it. No.
Yeah.
What was it?
Well, check it out.
I'll check it out. Okay.
And then you can see. But I also work on a lot of graphic novels. Chris Ware. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. I love his work. I love working with Chris. I love working with Art Spiegelman. We just finished a book that I actually printed in India by Sibag Montefiore called The World. It's not quite in the world yet, but it will be soon. And that's a 1,300-page book. It's really quite extraordinary. One just straight text. Oh my gosh, I don't even know how to characterize how many great books that I've worked on.
It's true. It's not fair. Don't want to necessarily show any favorites, but let me thank you for being so candid and forthright in your answers to me. It was a real pleasure to dig into what you do, the specifics, and maybe you could just leave me with one final thought on Bob Caro.
Well, I think Bob Caro has been someone who is the author who loves the book, and so when one finds that type of author, you want to do everything you possibly can to keep him happy, because he is a purveyor of ideas that are so extraordinary and important on power, with the Power Broker and of course the Lyndon Johnson books. Yes. That his message resonates, and if the book is the mechanism for getting out that message to our society, then to be part of that process is really, really gratifying.
Well, thank you for being part of this process, Andy.
You're welcome.
I'll be speaking to Andy Hughes, who's the Senior Vice President and Director of Production and Design for Knopf Doubleday Publishing Group in New York. Thanks again.
You're quite welcome. Take care, Nigel.
Yes, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.